Some dates hold quiet, others carry echoes of disaster. April 26th is not just a day, it's a graveyard of memory. From the radioactive silence of Chernobyl, to the shattered decks of the SS Sultana, to tornadoes that erased entire towns, this date has been haunted by tragedy across decades, continents, and generations. This is the story of April 26th, a day when the earth cracked, the skies tore open, and humanity was left to ask, why always this day? If stories like this matter to you, hit like to support the channel, and subscribe to uncover more forgotten corners of history, one tragic date at a time. April 26, 1986. Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Ukraine, Soviet Union. At 1:23 a.m., reactor 4 exploded, and the world would never be the same. This is the story of the Chernobyl disaster, where science, secrecy, and human error collided to create one of history's most chilling catastrophes. The reactor test was meant to be routine. Engineers at Reactor 4 were testing how long turbines would spin and provide power after a shutdown. But the test was flawed. Procedures were ignored, safety systems were disabled, and the reactor was already unstable. Then, it happened. 1 hour 23 minutes and 40 seconds a.m. A massive steam explosion blew the 1,000-ton reactor lid into the air. Seconds later, a second explosion scattered radioactive core materials into the atmosphere. The reactor was open to the night sky, burning, breathing death. First responders rushed in with no radiation gear. They fought flames made not of wood, but of graphite, uranium, and invisible poison. They picked up pieces of the core with their bare hands. Within hours, many would be vomiting, their skin burning from within. Most would die within weeks. The city closest to the reactor, Pripyat, remained unaware. People went to school, weddings were held. The sky was unusually blue, radiation rained invisibly. It wasn't until 36 hours later that evacuation was ordered. Buses arrived, families were told to pack for 3 days. They never returned. The radioactive cloud drifted over Europe. Sweden was the first to report abnormal levels. That's how the world found out. The Soviet Union had tried to hide it, but radiation doesn't listen to silence. Over 600,000 people were drafted as liquidators. Soldiers, miners, engineers. Many were exposed to lethal doses. To contain the core, a concrete sarcophagus was built. It still leaks. The cleanup would take decades and cost thousands of lives. Chernobyl is now a ghost zone. The trees still grow, but their roots drink poison. The silence speaks louder than any siren. April 26, 1986. The night the sky turned red. The night radiation learned to walk, and the world finally learned what happens when power runs unchecked. April 27, 1865. The Civil War had just ended. Hope was returning to a torn nation. But on the Mississippi River, just north of Memphis, more lives were about to be lost in a single moment than at the infamous sinking of the Titanic. This is the story of the SS Sultana, the deadliest maritime disaster in American history, and one the world forgot. The SS Sultana was a paddle-wheel steamboat built for just 376 passengers. But on April 24, 1865, she left Vicksburg, Mississippi, overloaded with more than 2,100 people, mostly Union soldiers. Recently freed from Confederate prison camps like Andersonville and Cahaba, they were heading north, home. The mood on board was hopeful. Spirits were high. The war was over. But beneath their feet, something was waiting. The Sultana had a known issue, a leaking boiler. Instead of proper repairs, it was hastily patched with a metal sleeve and promise. The ship's owners, motivated by profit and paid per head by the government, saw no reason to delay. So the Sultana steamed on, against the swollen river's current, burdened and burning. At 2 a.m., On April 27th, just 7 miles north of Memphis, the boiler exploded. A massive fireball engulfed the midsection of the ship. Sleeping men were thrown into the river. Others were trapped by the collapsing decks. Flames raced across the wooden frame. Chaos reigned. Some clung to the remains of the smokestacks. Others, too weak to swim, drowned silently beneath the moonlight. Locals rushed to help, pulling survivors from the frigid waters. Hospitals filled. Bodies floated for miles. By morning, over 1,800 people were dead or missing. Most had survived the war, only to die on a riverboat that should never have sailed. The tragedy of the Sultana was quickly overshadowed. Lincoln had been assassinated just days earlier. The country was in mourning, and the explosion was blamed on mismanagement, but no one was punished. The story faded into history's backwaters. The Mississippi swallowed the screams of the Sultana, but in cemeteries, journals, and fading family stories, the ghosts remain. April 27, 1865. The war had ended, but for hundreds aboard the Sultana, peace never came. April 26, 1989. The day the sky tore itself open, in a matter of minutes. One of the deadliest tornadoes in recorded human history swept across the Maniganj district of Bangladesh, leaving behind only wreckage, silence, and sorrow. This is the story of the Dawlatpur Saturia tornado. The conditions were ripe: oppressive heat, high moisture, and a volatile atmosphere. But no sirens sounded, no warnings were given. In the rural towns of Dawlatpur and Saturia, life moved normally, until, without warning, the wind began to roar. The tornado was massive, over 1.5 kilometers wide. It touched down and immediately began to devour everything in its path. Entire villages were lifted from the earth. Trees snapped like matchsticks. Tin rooftops were torn and hurled like blades. Mud homes crumbled. Concrete cracked. The air was filled with screams, wind, and flying debris. When the winds finally died, over 1,300 people were dead. More than 12,000 were injured. Nearly 80,000 were left homeless. It took less than 10 minutes. An entire world erased. The devastation was total. Hospitals overflowed. Clean water ran out. Food was scarce. And still, many searched through the rubble, looking for children, parents, neighbors. Some were never found. What struck Dawlatpur and Saturia was an F5, the highest classification. Winds possibly exceeded 300 kilometers per hour, 190 miles per hour. But in a country with limited resources, early warning systems were non-existent. There was no defense against the sky. The Dawlatpur Saturia tornado was more than a storm. It was a scar. A moment when nature showed its most violent face, and people had no time to run. April 26, 1989, when the wind became a wall, and the sky, a grave. April 26, 1942, Benxihu, Liaoning Province, Japanese-occupied China. Beneath the surface, thousands of miners dug through darkness. But that day, the earth didn't just take cold, it took lives. This is the story of the Benxihu Colliery explosion, the deadliest coal mining disaster in human history. Benxihu Colliery, known to the Japanese as Honkaiko, was a joint Chinese-Japanese operation. But the word joint was misleading. The mine operated under brutal conditions, enforced by the occupying Imperial Japanese Army. Chinese laborers were forced underground, working long shifts with minimal safety and no voice. Deep within the tunnels, coal dust accumulated. Methane gas built up in pockets, and no one above was listening. Shortly after the day's operations began, a lethal mix of coal, dust, and methane was ignited, likely by a spark from machinery or a dropped lamp. A fireball tore through the narrow tunnels. The explosion shook the earth, collapsing shafts and sealing exit routes. But what came next was worse. To prevent the fire from spreading, the Japanese authorities sealed the entrance, cutting off oxygen and hope for those still alive inside. No rescue attempt was made. Trapped miners suffocated in darkness. Officially, 1,549 miners died. But many believe the number was far higher. Only 31 bodies were returned to families. The rest were buried in mass graves, nameless beneath the soil they once dug. The Benxihu disaster was quickly buried, first by war, then by time. There were no international headlines, no trials, no apologies, only silence, and a coal-stained memory carried by generations. They went in to dig, they never came out. April 26, 1942, the day the mine roared and history stood quiet. April 26, 2015, Khyber, Pakhtunkhwa, Pakistan. Without warning, the skies darkened, the winds rose. A tornado, something almost unheard of in this part of the world, descended upon the cities of Peshawar, Nowshera, and Charsada. It came with no name, no forecast, no mercy. Pakistan is no stranger to extreme weather, monsoons, floods, heat waves, but tornadoes are rare, and this one struck without precedent. In just minutes, a deadly funnel cloud ripped across urban centers and rural villages alike. Winds exceeding 110 miles per hour carved through the region. Walls collapsed. Electric poles snapped. Entire roofs flew like paper. The storm system triggered a domino of devastation. Tornado winds, flash flooding, and hail the size of golf balls. Over 45 people lost their lives. More than 200 were injured. Dozens of children were among the victims. Some were crushed beneath collapsed walls. Others drowned in sudden floodwaters. Hospitals were flooded with the wounded. Entire neighborhoods were left without power, clean water, or food. People dug with their hands, calling out to those buried under bricks and steel. Pakistan's disaster response agencies scrambled to respond. The army, local volunteers, and rescue teams fought to pull survivors from the rubble. But time moved slowly, and the damage was too widespread. Experts confirmed it was a supercell tornado, a rare atmospheric phenomenon in this region. Many blamed climate change. Others saw it as an omen. But to the survivors, it was a nightmare they didn't even know to fear. April 26, 2015, a day when the sky turned violent, and silence came only after the storm. April 26th is not a symbol, it's a reminder that technology, nature, and human error can all conspire in the same breath, and that behind every headline is a story, and behind every story, a name. Thank you for watching, and for remembering. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe to make sure these tragedies, and the people within them, are never forgotten.